Whenever I talk about movies or TV shows on this channel, those videos don't actually do all that well, so it's kind of pointless to make them, but at the same time, I really enjoy watching movies and television and talking about it and sharing my thoughts, especially from a kind of behind the scenes perspective. Now, of course, if you clicked on this, I'm talking about the Iron Claw, which I was not involved in. I didn't shoot any of this. I was involved in the production, but watching it, there's always so many great lessons to take away for your own productions if you do want to shoot movies or anything like that. Obviously, A24 is a very popular studio now, so they've got their certain A24 aesthetic, and this doesn't really fit in that, I would say, as far as like horror or kind of provocative weirdness that A24 is known for, but it certainly fits the mold of A24 and being lower budget, but aesthetically pleasing and highly entertaining. This is a movie that I really quite enjoyed, and maybe it's my own personal bias of having three brothers myself. There's a family of four brothers in my family, so I really related to it on a personal level. But on a production level, the cinematography I thought was very great and humble. But even more than that, I thought the editing was so well done. And what I mean by that, and the lesson that I took away, and the lesson that you can take away, is that you don't have to over-edit everything. The great thing about this movie is that so many of the shots are single take, no editing. Maybe there's a zoom, maybe there's a camera adjustment to kind of reveal something, but for the most part, this movie is mildly edited. And it's great because you can just take what you will from that. For me, it's the idea that you don't need to overshoot everything, especially when it comes to narrative work, and you don't need to over edit everything to make it entertaining. It's actually far more interesting, I think, to have longer shots and less editing and a maybe slower pace when you are focused on the characters and the story and the drama that's unfolding. If you go watch this movie, pay attention to how often there's a cut or a camera change versus how often it just lets it linger. And this is actually a great advantage when you're making content as well because it saves you on the budget. This movie, considering who's in it, you got Zac Efron, you got Jeremy Allen White, you got quite a few other familiar faces, and yet the budget itself was anywhere from 15 to 20 million. There was some different reports out there, but 15 to 20 million is nothing for a movie these days. And you can see that when you're looking at, okay, this is a period piece, this has some, well-known people in it, some well-known actors. Obviously, they maybe didn't get paid as much as they would otherwise. Who knows? I don't know how it all unfolded behind the scenes, but you can make something great for a relatively low budget. And you can focus on those things that are more, stylistic, atmospheric than thinking of like, oh, I always have to edit, shot, reverse shot. I have to have all this coverage with my camera work. You can actually make something very simple, very quaint, very humble, and it can still be very, very entertaining. Now, of course, this all comes down to story and characters and plot and writing and all those other maybe more important things. The costumes, the set design, all that stuff is great in this movie, I thought, as well as just the character work. I think the writing is very nice and obviously based on a true story, so you've got that element as well where there's real life stakes, real life drama. I think the actual story is even sadder than the movie portrays it. And so you can go down that rabbit hole afterwards. It's certainly one of those movies that makes you want to, like, what was going on? Who are these people? And what was their life actually like? It will do all that and more. But just from a pure entertainment standpoint, just watching the film, I was delighted to see something so simple that wasn't the $200 million blockbuster, that wasn't the $100 million art film. It wasn't something, crazy expensive like Megalopolis and is a total flop. It's something humble, something simple, something quaint, but executed, from my perspective, so well in the world of professional wrestling and what it means to be a wrestler, especially in this era where so much of it is, not necessarily, it's a performance, right? And you know that watching the film, and you're still brought into those stakes, to those matches, to the consequences and the outcomes, those results of these performances, rather than, what you would consider more of a traditional sport, which would be, a game with rules and fair outcomes and actual competition, right? That's not really what wrestling and even this movie, presents it as. It's presented as a performance. But even then, it's so well done that you actually get involved in those stakes with the, sound design, the score, the lighting, the cinematography, all of it just combines to make this really nice aesthetic. But the one thing that stood out to me the most was the editing. How simple it can be to just let a shot linger, let the characters, let the actors do their job, do their acting, and don't overcomplicate it. You don't need to shoot 20 different ways just to have good coverage and then have an editor chop it all up just so you have all these, close-up face shots, which seems to be the tendency for the bigger, more expensive blockbuster movies that end up being more stale, more boring, less interesting. That's probably across the board for a lot of reasons. Again, the writing, etc. But just from an editing standpoint, letting a shot play out, letting it just settle and just sit with it. I was enthralled the whole time. This was a very gripping movie for me. And even then, it's very simple when you watch it. It's not like a lot is happening most of the time. There's a few, more action-y type scenes, which do have, more editing involved. But even then, it's taken with restraint. It's taken with this idea of less is more, which is something I've talked a lot about across the board. Less is more. And when it's done with purpose, when it's done with intention, you can actually deliver something that's far more interesting by just doing less and being intentional with those decisions, being intentional with what you're showing versus what you're not. You don't have to throw everything into the recipe to make it taste good. Oftentimes, the best recipes are very simple, basic ingredients just executed well. And I think the same is true for film, for television, even for YouTube content creation. You can go to endless lengths doing as much as possible. Graphics and sound design and music and sound effects and color grading and lighting and going crazy with every single thing, spending a whole lot of time and money and energy to make something that's ultimately not even entertaining, not even all that engaging. Or you can do something like The Iron Claw, which I highly recommend. You should watch it. I forget which streaming platform I watched it on. I think it was on Max, but maybe it's on something else. But it's certainly available on streaming. If you want to check it out, if you want to buy it, that's certainly an option as well. And I can't imagine this video will do all that well, but for the people who it is relevant to, I encourage you, watch it, pay attention to the editing, and just realize like how much it was the perfect. I love these movies that inspire me to be more creative, to be more productive in what I'm doing. The other one of my favorites that I've also talked about recently was Primer. These kind of low budget indie films, and this isn't, it's A24. I can't say I don't know what considers indie anymore, but certainly lower budget. And Primer is way, way low budget. That's an older film at this point in time, 20 years old, I think. The Iron Claw and movies like it, where it's a low budget, but executed so well, inspire me to take that same, like you don't need the Marvel, Disney budgets to make something good. You can do it with very little. And in fact, you can do it with less than you probably think if you just make good choices in the parts that matter the most. And oftentimes it can be the stuff that's free. Writing is relatively free. Pen, paper, a laptop, things everyone has, just the ideas in your head just executed well on the page. Writing is so cheap. It is basically free other than time. And then of course you need actors, you need locations, you need wardrobe, you need all those things. But you can also do a lot with a very little by embracing this mentality of less is more and not thinking you need to cover every angle, get every focal length, overshoot it to the point where, it's entertaining just because something's happening, you're cutting, and it becomes a distraction away from the actual story. Flashy images do kind of, jangle the keys a little bit in terms of like, oh, look over here. Oh, look over here. Hey, we cut. But if there's nothing behind it, if there's no substance, all of that is kind of empty and pointless. So you don't need to do it. Focus on the stuff, the substance, the story, the characters, the writing. If you focus on that stuff first, you don't even need to do all the fancy, flashy editing. You can just have a shot and let the actors act. Let the characters talk to each other. And that can be a very enjoyable movie. Now, I don't know what other people thought about this movie. I don't know how it was critically rated. I imagine like decently. But I liked it. And so that's why I want to share my thoughts.